Starting broadcast. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the third webinar in our Red Hat FAA webinar series. My name is Jonathan Beach, and I am the FAA dedicated solution architect for Red Hat. We have another great webinar. If you missed our two previous ones, we did one on Ansible Automation. I'm jumping ahead. We did one on the cloud access as well as a satellite demo or webinar. And today we want to show the FAA teammates Red Hat Automation Platform. But before I get started, I wanted to go over some ground rules for today. First, by default, everyone's microphone and video camera has been muted. That is on purpose. We don't really have the technology to have everybody asking questions or having a lot of video feeds going at one time. So I'm going to ask everybody if they have a question. On the right-hand side, I believe there's a Q&A section. In that section, you can type your question. And Jeff Thompson is also on the line. He's our inside sales reps, as well as myself. We'll be answering those questions as we go along. And Tony will also pause at various points in the presentation to answer some of the questions that we are unable to answer at that time. That being said, if you just want to chat amongst yourselves, there is a chat function as well that Jeff and I can see. I will be putting in my email contact information. If there's a question that you don't want to ask in a formal group setting, feel free to reach out to me. If you have a question about subscriptions, the ULA, anything like that, always reach out to me first, and I can definitely get you an answer for that. So, like I said, today I have Tony Bowe. He's a Red Hat Emerging Technologies Specialist Solution Architect. And he's going to be giving an excellent presentation on Red Hat Automation Platform. Ansible is probably one of the coolest things that I've learned in my short time here at Red Hat, and I think it's a great thing. I used it at a short time in my previous role, and it's really cool. And every time I hear Tony give this presentation, I learn something new. So I'm sure you guys are going to learn a lot. With that said, Tony.
Hey everyone, my name is Tony Bowe, and like John said, I am a solutions architect for emerging technology. Glad to be here today. Hope everyone is doing well, and you guys had a good Thanksgiving. Without further ado, we'll jump into this presentation. So it's about Ansible and the greater Ansible ecosystem. I know some of you have had experience with Ansible, and some of you may have had experience with Ansible Tower. Hopefully this will be educational and shed some light on some newer resources, newer technologies that you can play with and potentially get you to use more Ansible in the near future. And so we'll start off with automation. Automation happens when you or I have a problem. Because we're engineers, we think of a way to solve this technical issue easily. And that easily might mean, all right, well, we might write a script. Or maybe we'll go online and look for an application to do it for us. Both of these are some form of automation. And really what this does for us is it saves us time. And ultimately time means money. And so the less effort we can put into something that is repeatable, better for us, we can focus on something else, better for the organization. So in the greater enterprise, in our teams and the people we work with, we might be automating, we might not be, but people around us, someone out there is automating, whether it's in the network team, the security team, operations, developers, infrastructure, and so on. And really, if none of these people are automating, then we really need to encourage them too, right? Because it helps make their jobs easier. And when their jobs are easier, we can communicate better. We can get our jobs done a lot faster too. Whether it's submitting a form, whether it's setting up an application for another person or receiving some sort of, let's say, like VM infrastructure that needs to be set up, or just getting something validated by security, right? Being able to solve more problems across the teams faster. And that's, you know, the true end goal of automation in the enterprise. And why this is valuable is, well, when you're working on something, you're trying to deliver, some sort of goal or an end product to a customer. That customer might be another team, another organization, um, some company. And by being able to, deliver on that quicker, we are able to innovate faster, right? In tech, really a lot of what we work on changes every day. And so to keep up with that, we need to have time, and time is limited. And so, you know, me writing a script or you writing some sort of automation today helps us and hopefully helps another person, another team. But if an entire organization is able to do that, then really we're going to be moving a lot quicker than you think. And so, we want to touch on Ansible. And Ansible is the point of this presentation. But why Ansible? Well, for those of you that are familiar with Ansible, you may have seen, the YAML format of a playbook. A playbook is how you write Ansible, and it's simple. You look at a playbook, and we'll have opportunities to see that in the next few slides. Look at a playbook, you can clearly tell what's going on. There's different tasks. They're executed in order, 1, 2, 3, A, B, C. It's readable. When you're looking at a bash script, if you're familiar with bash, then you'll be able to read it. But if you're not, let's say you're not a programmer, you've never touched Linux before, and you're looking at some script, bash, Python, whatever, it's going to be difficult to kind of grasp what's happening, especially if, you're tasked with running some sort of automation. Whether it's a click of a button to kind of start something, you want to know what it does before you click it, because you have the ownership of executing this, and you're responsible for the end result. What makes Ansible powerful isn't the simplicity of just understanding what it does and using it. It's powerful because you can use it for almost anything. So think your applications that you're deploying, network infrastructure, security, orchestrating an entire workflow. So an entire workflow might consist of, all right, I want to deploy this application only after this infrastructure has come up. Or maybe after all of these things are up, I want to apply some sort of security constraint onto these items. And these items, might be really, really different. You might have an entire Cisco stack that you want to apply security constraints to, and an entire Dell stack that you want to apply security constraints to. In your traditional automation world, you're going to have to not only write the libraries you're going to be using, or hope that someone has written them so that you can utilize them and that it's being maintained. And today's ecosystem with Ansible, because it's open source and because people are heavily using it around the world, a lot of these items are maintained. One of the big values of Ansible is that it's agentless. So you're not running an application on your infrastructure or your host machine to execute your script. So think, your traditional endpoint security applications that you'd run, like McAfee or Norton antivirus. They have to be on the machine in order to execute a scan. And so this is important because it allows you to not only be able to run whatever automation you want, it's secure. You define how your Ansible automation accesses that machine. So, what can I do with Ansible automation? You might have heard from me earlier that touches network infrastructure, touches applications, but that's only a small footprint of a greater scope. Really, what you can do is automate your load balancers, storage, think your cloud providers like AWS, GCP, Azure. Think, all right, well, I have an API. So not just like your applications that are defined under the Ansible ecosystem, what if I just had some sort of API that I want to be able to manage? Well, Ansible can do that too. Really, Ansible touches a lot of things that you normally wouldn't think of. Um, when you have heard of Ansible, a lot of times it's just mentioned in the scope of, all right, well, I can use it on Linux. Okay, maybe I can use it on my router or switches, but the scope is much greater than you think. So, I'm using Ansible, John's using Ansible, some of you are using Ansible, and when we're all using Ansible or some sort of automation, we need some sort of way to manage that, right? And so, short answer is you need an automation platform because, essentially without an automation platform, we're automating in silos. And if we're automating in silos, we're pretty much, doing our own thing, reinventing the wheel, all of these different, so to say, time wasting activities, right? And what we want to do is be more efficient. Oh, and I apologize, there's some background sound. There's a drill operating outside of my condo at the moment, out of my control. So I apologize if you guys are having some sound interference. I'll be a bit louder. So with the platform, you're going to be able to create and not create in a silo, create together. And what that means is, I'll create a playbook and then John can create one, you can create one, but we know what we're creating. And whether it's individually or together, the idea is that you're not recreating the wheel. You're creating something new that can be reusable and that allows us to scale and it allows us to collaborate more because now I'm building something that John needs to build upon or needs to be able to build his stuff. And so when we look at the Red Hat Ansible Automation Platform, it's a framework for automating across your IT operations. And IT might be a subset, but if we're using it across our IT operations, we can essentially use it, in the infrastructure operations, developer network. Really, in an enterprise, these teams might be separate, some might be together, but the idea is that we're using it across these teams, we're engaging with each other, and because we're engaging, it's allowing us to scale. So, we'll have different clusters of Ansible Tower, and it'll be under a single pane of glass, and we'll see what each team is able to do, what they're able to build, and then you can immediately consume that. Ansible is the lingua franca of the enterprise. So your single language for operating across different types of tools and applications and infrastructure. And remember, it's simple. So you don't need to know programming to understand what Ansible is doing. Without any programming knowledge, as long as you're able to double click a YAML file, that playbook of yours, and start reading it, then you'll have a grasp of, all right, well, this playbook is going to do this. It's going to spin up a web server for me, or it's going to, go to Google and search for, this query for me. I want, a family of puppies, or maybe I want to be able to go into Cisco and deploy a set of VLANs so that my applications can all communicate with each other on this private network. But they don't have to know like how that's built, right? They just know that as long as they can read it, they can execute it, and it'll do it for them. Granted, we'll need access to all of those resources, right? But the idea is that because you're building this automation, you've defined, how it accesses your environment and who is able to access that. And so someone in the networking team isn't really going to be able to access items in the infrastructure team unless the admin of the infrastructure team allows that. And so this is what a platform provides, a way for the enterprise to come together, collaborate, engage, scale, create, share, not share, permissions, think security, right? So here are a list of a few, not all, of the certified platforms that Ansible will allow you to automate right off the bat. So you download Ansible today into your machine, and you look up Ansible modules. I want to do Ansible modules around AWS, or I want to do Ansible modules around Arista. It's going to show you how to do that. So you go to the Ansible documentation, you look at the format of the YAML file, tells you to add a name, the task that you can execute. Pretty straightforward. And because it's so easy to get started, these modules allow you to, use them across each other too. And so you can take a module from Arista and then combine it with a module from Cisco, right? Maybe your networking infrastructure isn't just all Arista. It's a combination of, Cisco, Arista, maybe you have an F5 load balancer, and your playbook is going to be able to consume all of those things. And you're not going to have to build that framework from the ground up because they're certified. What that means is these vendors are the ones creating and supporting that side of the Ansible ecosystem. And that's what I mean when I say Ansible is open source and is used by many, many in the world. Here are some numbers. You're going to be able to save a lot of money and time using Ansible, primarily because of the ecosystem that is already available. So you're not going to have to create or recreate a lot of the stuff that you're thinking of automating because someone else probably has a very similar role that you have in your organization, a very similar government organization or a commercial organization that has already used Ansible to do this for themselves. To give you an example of how Azure Cloud works is, for those of you who have used Azure Cloud, you're deploying a VM, you're deploying some sort of routing infrastructure. Much of it is done in Ansible. So the Microsoft team behind the Azure Cloud provider has built most of their infrastructure using Ansible. So think of that click you're making when you're in the browser and you're trying to spin something up. Ansible's doing the work and it's generating, Microsoft some form of income. Similarly, if you're in front of the screen and you have written some Ansible playbooks, you have an Ansible automation platform, and your organization consumes Ansible, every time you make a click, you're saving time, or you're providing a service to a customer, and that is in a way paying you back some sort of ROI. So we've talked about how Ansible works for an individual, how it works across teams, what it provides. Here we're gonna jump into why, Ansible is the universal language. What does it mean to be simple, right? And why is it that, different people in different teams are able to build upon each other and just create? Isn't there like a skill gap? And as a reminder, it's agentless. I mentioned the simple. Um, it's powerful because of all of the different integrations. We're supported by a huge community and a lot of third-party vendors. 50 plus are certified and agentless, right? So you don't have to deploy anything onto your machine. You can use Ansible from your laptop and then tell it to provision something, in some data center somewhere or some API in the cloud. Cross-platform. So if I want to use it on Windows, I can. I can use it on a VM. So think Fedora, CentOS, RHEL. Um, you might have some IBM Z servers. We can do that too. Your networking devices. So think iOS, um, think Nexus. Human readable, right? It touches all of these machines, but the language, it's pretty much in plain English. Hey, I want to, you know, create a VLAN. And so across your Arista routers or maybe uh, Cisco devices, you know, both of these are able to create VLANs. Ansible will handle talking to them for you. Dynamic inventories. So when you're executing automation, one of the key things is, having some sort of list of the items you want to execute against. And sometimes it's hard to maintain these lists. You might have an Excel sheet, but you're not responsible for, bringing in the new hardware that just got shipped in by box and someone else is doing that. And so you have to wait on them to update that Excel sheet. Um, Ansible allows for integrations with different dynamic, or that are called dynamic inventories, but it allows for integrations with different databases, and it'll be able to pull your quote unquote inventory of infrastructure, and it captures what's up and what's not available to reach. So as long as it has a network connection, it's able to reach that. But the idea is that it's dynamic. And so, you have a cloud provider and you have this infrastructure, you're not going to need to go into Ansible and list it one by one. You can do anything manual you like, but Ansible allows you to be able to consume from databases and, third-party providers, cloud providers, and pull that list of infrastructure for you. Um, and another problem we have as an engineer, version control. Ansible is able to address that. Long story short, our issue of version control, as if we're looking at traditional type of automation, is that I write a script, 3 years ago today, it probably won't work because I've either updated my infrastructure, I've either updated the script and now it runs a different way and the infrastructure is, incompatible with it. Version control in Ansible allows you to be able to rerun playbooks that you've created years ago. There's a lot of quote unquote magic. Really, it's just automation allowing that to exist, right? You're able to define, all right, well, I want this playbook to run in this version. I'm able to roll back, etc. There's ways to address the version control inside the Ansible engine. So here's a diagram of how Ansible looks inside a data center environment, or maybe your network. You have your internet. We can call that the public private cloud environment. You have your users. You have your playbooks. Your CMDB is just where it's going to grab your inventory. Your host, your network devices. In the center, we have the Ansible Automation Engine. And the Ansible Automation Engine is what will operate on top of your host, your network devices, denoted by the arrows. And everything on the left is, what is consumed by the Ansible Automation Engine. So a user, as denoted by the arrow, is the one executing the playbook. When the playbook is executed, it's either going to get the items it's going to run against from an inventory file that is ultimately being consumed from the public cloud, private cloud, or the CMDB. And once all of that is inside the Ansible engine, it's going to say, all right, I'm going to access these set of IP addresses. And these set of IP addresses could be hosts, so Linux machines, Windows servers, or network devices, routers, switches, load balancers, firewalls, or they're going to access this not in your network, but outside of your network, inside the public cloud, private cloud. I mentioned a few times before, as long as you can double click on a playbook and uh, get it to open, you're going to be reading a YAML file, which is written in English, and that there's a name. There's going to be a list of tasks, kind of like a to-do list. Do this, then do this next, and then do this. The way Ansible operates is as it's executing this automation, it's just like a checklist. Everything happens sequentially. It doesn't need to. You can certainly set different parameters to operate in a different order if needed. But normally you wouldn't need to do that because automation normally happens in A, B, or C, or waits on a different piece to be successful, and then does a following item. Here's a YAML file. Like I said, there's your name, and then there's your set of tasks. So we can just say, like, this is task number 1, this is number 2, this is number 3. As you can see, this playbook is going to be installing and starting Apache. And for those of you that don't know Apache, it's like your web server. So it's starting a web server so you can host a website. And the host here says web. Behind the scenes, your inventory file is going to have a category called web. And under web is going to be a set of IP addresses. It's that simple. This become portion is just, do I need to be sudo? Do I need super user access? Do I need to have root access to run things? And if your machine, if your security requirements have specified so, then you might need this flag. You might not. And that's where there's a lot of value, like I mentioned. You don't need an agent on your machine because it uses SSH to access that machine. This first task is checking if we have this specific package in one of our hosts in the category web. So this is the name of the package, and we want it to be the latest package. And it's going to be operating this task through yum. And for those guys that are familiar with Linux, yum is a package manager. So here it's going to use yum to check for this package, check for the latest to see if it exists on this machine. This next one, pretty simple. It's going to check if this file. So it's not using yum, it's going to be using a different module. And like I mentioned, there's a lot of modules you can just look up and use immediately. You can mix and match. If your automation calls for it, you don't want to be mixing and matching different things that, you certainly can, but the idea is you want to, when you're developing, you keep things organized. So here I'm installing and starting Apache. So I'm going to check for the things that I need for Apache to start. And so the index file is important because when I start my Apache server, I need it to serve something, right? It's going to suck if I start a web server and then it's not serving a website. Just go to the link and it's going to error out because it doesn't have anything to show me. But this index file is what it's going to show me. It's going to check the location of the index file, uh, and it's going to throw it into the destination where Apache usually looks and serves it from. So var ww HTML. And then this one is I'm going to start HTTPD. That's it. This is calling upon the service function application within Linux, and it's going to start this application. And it's that simple. When you're thinking of Python, Perl, or Bash, this type of automation script is going to take a bit more work. And I'm saying that politely. It's going to take uh, maybe a moderate level of work. Um, a bit of a more bit of Googling. Today, maybe not as much because someone has written these types of automation in Perl and Python and Bash the last 4 to 5 years, and a lot of these types of automation exist, albeit in different ways. The way Ansible has, operated and how it's being consumed by the community, there have been standards set for utilizing these types of libraries, modules. And so if you Google Ansible installing Apache and starting it, you're going to see a lot of very similar playbooks because, I mean, they're not going to have to come up with their own solution. A lot of this is already like available. The modules give you straight examples, and there are a lot of best practices outlined. And so you might come across a playbook that might not even have these checks, right? So I just want to start Apache. I don't even need to check the index file. I'm just gonna make sure it's there and then I'm gonna start it. Or maybe I'm not gonna check anything, I'm just gonna start it because I'm gonna assume that CentOS has, or my Linux VM, whatever I'm running it across, has already has these files. And I'm just gonna start it and run the server that way. But that doesn't indicate that you can't have your own custom practices for your organization. There's standards for the community, the enterprise, and then your enterprise. And Ansible supports all of these, right? We refer to best practices in the industry because those are a way of guiding us to follow organization, ways to do things, to follow ways of just like being able to maintain. And different organizations have different ways of maintaining different types of applications and code. And so ultimately, when you consume these types of items, whether it's the leading software in the industry or some sort of automation, you're going to be meshing it with your own organizational practices. All right, back into the topology that we were referencing before. I mentioned modules. If you're familiar with programming, they're essentially like your libraries. They're built on Python. You can build your own modules if you'd like and extend them to the Ansible ecosystem. It's very likely what you're trying to use and build on your infrastructure already exists. These modules are and help. Initially, when Ansible first started, were created by the community, and then the ownership went to the vendors because so many people were using them. And these modules are really what powers your automation because you don't have to write them; they already exist. And here is an example of a module. This is using, if you were looking at this in the side of the YAML, you would call this the template module. So while Ansible has, modules built by, Red Hat or your third-party vendors or the community, it also has plugins. And here is an example of I want to convert this variable, some variable, into YAML. And so plugins are basically shortcuts that allow you to do some sort of conversion or um, translation or filtering. I have a huge variable and I want a subset of that. There's many, many more plugins. Those are the top two that I could think of for the time being. But the idea is that when you're using modules and you're becoming more of an avid user of Ansible, you're going to be able to use shortcuts to, get your point across a lot easier. All right. So remember when we were talking about our playbook and we were talking about the host and it had the word web in that, and I mentioned, inside your inventory file, you might have a few different categories, and the one we're operating on is web. Well, this is it. This is your web category. This is your DB category. This is your switches category. When I was using my Ansible playbook here, just jump back to it real quick. I want this playbook to run on the web category. So it's these two URLs here. And it doesn't have to be URLs. It could be IP addresses if needed. This is how it knows what infrastructure to automate against. And if I wanted to automate against all of these, they're all different items. I normally wouldn't automate against all of these. You can just specify inside the host field all. So if you said all, it would just do it on all. What you will see as you're delving into the Ansible automation journey is sometimes you'll see inventory files that have a lot of different categories that are around just web. So you might separate out your web categories, or maybe you'll have an inventory file of different databases. So different databases, let's call this DB1. It might be on a different version than another DB down the list. And so you want to separate those out just so that you know that when I run one playbook, it's going to use this DB. If I run another playbook, it's going to use a separate one. This is pretty self-explanatory. Your cloud environment could be, Red Hat OpenStack, Satellite, your VMware stack. So VMware can be on-prem. There's also VMware Cloud, AWS, Rackspace, Google Compute or Google Cloud, Azure. So some popular CMDBs in industry right now are ServiceNow, Popular, BMC, and you can have a custom one as well. These are for consuming your infrastructure in a way where it can present you a list of, or a way of just aggregating your infrastructure, and Ansible can consume that. We touched on this, pretty straightforward. Once you have your playbook, your inventory file, you can essentially automate against everything that you have. The idea against automating against everything you have is important because you might have a solution that combines all of your Cisco items into a single pane of glass. But you don't just have Cisco, you have Arista too, you have Juniper, and those are just the networking pieces. Then you think about your Windows infrastructure and your RHEL infrastructure. That's, when you're creating automation, it doesn't just touch one piece. Think, all right, I want to spin up a VM. I want to make sure that only 2 ports are open. It's able to access a very specific part of the network. So think, it might be isolated to a VLAN. Your automation is going to touch the VM, the networking, and potentially the firewall. And if it needs to, access other items like storage, you're sending traffic to it. Okay, now it's going to include your storage and then your load balancer. And Ansible can do all of that, right? Ansible isn't here to take out your existing, automation. It's there to complement that because existing automation infrastructure, existing automation software typically encompasses, that vendor's infrastructure.
Hey,
And so we're
Tony,
gonna, yep,
real quick,
go
if you
ahead.
don't mind, I have a question about that last page from Giuseppe. Could you explain a little bit more a plugin and how it differs from a module?
Sure, sure. So a plugin is for data transformation. So think I have a bunch of variables that are numbers, and I want to convert it into a string so that it can, be used in a different variable somewhere, some sort of logic, correct, right? Whereas a module is a library. I think, all right, well, I want to use a Cisco module, so it's going to be a library of Cisco in programming in your traditional or your modern programming languages. A library will have functions that you can operate against. So in the example of a Cisco module, I want to SSH to this router and create a VLAN, right? So another one would be I want to SSH into this Cisco router and get um, the VLAN, and it's going to return me a VLAN number as an integer format, and then I can use a plugin to change that integer into a string, or maybe I can change it into a, instead of an integer, like a floating point. So it'll be a number with a decimal. That's how you would use a plugin. You're using it to transform data, or you're using it to get a subset of the data you had before. Does that answer your question? I'm gonna have to lean on you, John. I can't see the
Yeah,
chat.
that's
Okay,
okay. Yeah, we'll see if it does, and we'll get back to you if it does
sure,
not.
sure. So Ansible's great, right? You can use it with just SSH. You have an entire ecosystem spanning Red Hat and the community and the vendors, and you can create playbooks very easily. But remember when we said, if I was writing a playbook and John was writing a playbook and you're writing a playbook, we're going to be pretty much operating in silos. Well, that's where Tower comes in. Ansible Tower is a platform in the Ansible Automation Platform that allows an enterprise to, stand up um, and access. So it's a server. You deploy this Ansible Tower software onto the server, and there's a website you go to. And once you navigate there, it's basically a GUI that allows you to delegate to different people so different users can access it. It might be a user from networking, a team from networking, a team from security, a team from operations. They're all accessing Ansible Tower, but everyone has different roles, right? They're operating on their own infrastructure, or they might have playbooks that touch infrastructure across, your line of business. Um, and the GUI allows you to consume playbooks from source control. So think GitHub or GitLab. Um, we back then when we wrote playbooks or when we wrote scripts, sorry, not playbooks, we wrote scripts in automation before Ansible's time. We would store them on our laptops or a floppy disk, a USB. Hey, this person in this team over there, we're chatting with them, over lunch or and we're having a drink with them, and it seems like we could help them because we wrote a playbook or we wrote a script that does what they need to do. And so instead of being able to share it over, you know, share it over the internet or share it from a database. We just hand them like a USB or a floppy disk, and then they can take that and then they can test it out and run it. And then as we progress into um, the future, we have uh, more cloud-based ways of allowing someone access to a playbook and script, and that you know you can send them over email, you can text someone a script if you need to. But the idea is like as much as you can share it, you're the one that still owns it and maintains it, and so you might be able to give them that automation by sharing that file. But every time they need an updated version, they're going to have to reach back out to you. What Ansible Tower does is it's able to consume from source control repository and stay updated. And so you're able to share automation that you've created and that you're updating or someone else is updating, and then other people are able to consume the latest one easily just by accessing Ansible Tower. This is what it looks like. You have a nice little laptop here. You're accessing the Ansible Tower GUI. I don't know how they got into full screen because mine actually looks like it's inside a browser and it has like a URL tab here. Actually has like 100 tabs underneath because I like to open tabs, and I think that I'm going to be keeping it for like the next year. So I just keep it like pinned in the left corner of my browser. Ansible Tower might be one of them, or I might have multiple instances of Ansible Tower open. But you can actually expand these tabs here, these icons, to indicate what they mean. So I'll just click this menu button. But basically, this is the GUI, right? Like you have a place to access Ansible Tower, so you don't need to run your playbooks from the CLI. You can actually, for the people who are less command line advocates. I am a command line advocate. I think the command line is a lot easier to use. You have a lot more control in the command line. But for those that prefer something visual, you're able to access the GUI and click on a button and see your automation in action. But see, when I click on that button, it's going to be logged. So this is a way of auditing what people do against infrastructure, which is super valuable inside an enterprise. How many times have you tried accessing a server that you stood up the day before and it's offline because someone else decided to unplug it? They decided that it was their server and so they're doing something on it, or someone unplugged a Ethernet cable and it brought down maybe just two switches or a router or maybe your entire enterprise, right? A lot of times. So the Tower platform not only audits what users do, it's able to keep track of what's online. It's just simple SSH, but super valuable because you can set schedules for how often it checks in with your infrastructure. So your infrastructure is inside an inventory, right? And this is a way to, keep your host, and your host could be all of your network infrastructure, firewalls, applications, or Linux servers, Windows servers. This is a way to keep track of all of those things in a single view. This is going to complement your other automation that you have in place, or automation lack thereof. So I mentioned the push button, very easy GUI to operate around. You have a lot of pretty graphs. As an admin, maybe you want that next person to one of your team members that you like joking around with. When they log in, they're not going to see anything, so you take away all their permissions. The RESTful API is useful because maybe you're not using the GUI, you're not using the command line, you're using a different application that you want to be able to operate on Ansible Tower, but Ansible Tower is the one doing all the work behind the scenes. And so that's where the API will become useful, RBAC, enterprise integrations. So you can use the built-in login mechanism, or you can tie it into, TACACS, Radius, Active Directory, OAuth. Centralized logging is just another way of saying, I can audit you and see everything you're doing inside Ansible Tower. Oh, and my favorite feature of Ansible Tower is workflows. Imagine the days of I write a script in Python, it does this, and then someone else wrote a Perl script that waits on my Python script to operate, and then it checks everything, and it fails or it checks everything and it succeeds and it runs what it needs to run. That type of workflow. Well, when you're building Ansible playbooks, you can essentially do the same thing. I'll write a playbook, John can write a playbook, and we can stick it together in a workflow. And so they operate in conjunction of each other. And that's very powerful. Think of our example from earlier where when we stand up a VM, we need to check that only 2 ports are open, and then that's only on the VM side. So that might just be one playbook. And then now we're going to check the network infrastructure, the VLAN. That's another playbook. And then we got to check the firewall, another playbook. And then, the load balancer to see who's how we're getting traffic into the actual VM or web server that we set up. That's another playbook. We put all of those together into a single workflow. Now, you might think, all right, why don't we just throw it all into a single Ansible playbook? Yeah, you could do that. But in an enterprise, the simpler your playbooks are, and if you define an organizational structure, documentation around how playbooks are written or how they're consumed from the community or third party, you're going to be able to very easily mix and match. Other people are going to be able to use a smaller subset of items to create a bigger automation because you've documented your items well. In development, we always think, all right, well, let's not try to make things so complicated. Let's keep them simple because we're going to be reusing a lot of different things. Let's make it in a way so that we can reuse it, combine it, and then continue to reuse it. And that's the whole goal of a workflow. Here's another diagram of not only just the Ansible engine, but Ansible Tower. Now, there's a lot more in here because we want you to see the bigger picture. You're going to have your admins who define what gets consumed inside Tower. And that what gets consumed is, all right, these users get access to Tower. These are the playbooks these users get to access. These users have permissions. They can also put in their own Ansible playbooks, Ansible automation. So role-based access control is very important, right? If a user who has written a script that's on their laptop, they decide to leave and someone accidentally wipes their laptop and the automation is gone, well, that's a problem with Ansible Tower because there's source control with GitHub and GitLab, Bitbucket. And if I remember correctly, the FAA uses Bitbucket. You can be able to tie Ansible Tower to your source repository control. If someone leaves, that permission, that admin, hopefully you guys have more than one admin managing the platform. You just migrate over the permissions to a different person, and you're able to migrate the permissions of access and define new roles for new users. It gives people a way to get access to automation, ramp up on automation. If you have a new person coming in on your team, and you want to be able to be in damage control mode as they're learning, you can limit how much permission they have on the Ansible Tower platform and say, hey, I just want you to make sure these things are being checked on, 3 days a week. So just click this button and that's it. Or you can say, you know, you probably don't know what this playbook is going to do, and you can certainly look into the YAML file and see what's going on. But all I want you to do is just click this button. And the difference between those two scenarios is, you have the freedom of giving people different tasks, and they don't really have to go and ramp up all too much unless you specify them to, and they can still execute the same type of automation you would have done. And now they're doing it, and they're slowly getting used to the platform and understanding. Um, Hopefully, they're learning Ansible on the side as well. They don't have to; they can just use it as is. But the idea is, you guys can focus on bigger and better things. As a user of Ansible Tower, I can jump in and not understand the playbook and still be able to execute the automation. And that's powerful because now you're able to take a set of playbooks and just delegate it to a very specific person and have them understand, hey, these playbooks are to do this. This is what you keep track of alongside your primary role, of course. But, I want you to check on these things. And, as you continue to do these, I'll give you more responsibility and you can manage the platform. Because ultimately, now from an organizational perspective, you guys are working together, right? There's going to be a set of people who write the playbooks, probably, or you're consuming them for the community from Red Hat, or you're obviously getting the playbooks from somewhere. Now they're in Ansible Tower, and the automation's happening. It's happening against your infrastructure, and things are sped up. You're saving time, and people are coming in and out, and you're able to alleviate the cons of someone leaving because the gap in training is a lot lower. There's a lot of other items here. We talked about the different infrastructure that it involves, and all of the different things it touches. There's also this part that's very important, cloud.redhat.com. So there's the analytics. You're actually going to be able to see, so let's say the FAA has 30 Ansible Tower environments across multiple teams. You're going to be able to see through the automation analytics portal what is the most used module. And that's important. Why is this module being used a lot? Is it because we have a very specific technology set inside the FAA? That's probably the case. Or, maybe it's just something that's being used a lot inside a lot of our playbooks because someone had a script running every day and they forgot to turn it off. And really it doesn't do anything except, waste electrical resources or compute power. But see, like these two use cases show us the power of analytics. The automation hub. So I mentioned the certified modules. There's also the certified collection. The collections are from the vendor directly. So they support the modules, but not only do they support the modules, they have taken a set of modules that are commonly used across their infrastructure and put them in a collection that they support. And this collection it could be for commonly used things across the Ansible ecosystem on your infrastructure. I know it's a lot of, all right, this is what it could do, this is what they'll support. Really, you can go to the Automation Hub and see what it includes. A lot of it's on GitHub as well. So look up the VMware collection and you'll see what they packaged in for you as the customer. Partners, same idea, right? A partner creates a collection based off of what they try to present to an organization. Hey, we're going to have you guys use a mix of VMware, a mix of Cisco, and a mix of Linux and Windows. So their collection might just consume all of those things. That's what a collection is. And then services catalog. So compliance, self-service, governance. That's going to be able to kind of help you define, all right, well, these are the types of things I can, playbooks, the thing or governance I have to consider when I'm running these things across my items. Or maybe I have these security requirements. Where do I go to get automation or find out more about how I can use this against my infrastructure? That's where the service catalog comes in handy. So we're gonna do a quick time check here. We're at 12:30. Sorry, I am off my time game today. Um, any questions do you want to bring up, John? I'm gonna
Sure.
stop for a bit
Um,
here.
yeah, I do have a few that I wasn't able to answer. Um, the first question that I didn't really have an answer to, do we have or do you have any examples of using Ansible to deploy virtual hosts, meaning RHEL, we'll just say RHEL 8 and Rev, onto bare metal um, via Pixie or anything else?
Yes. Well, yes, it's possible, and it's funny because if I remember correctly, Linus is in the process of getting some of the like they're trying to optimize their version of the Pixie boot with Ansible. Isn't that correct, John?
That's correct. And this question does come from an employee over there.
Oh, I see. Yeah, so that's you guys are doing that, and then you
I don't know if it's the same group or not, but yes, it's the
okay.
same organization.
So if you think objectively about Ansible, you can set up the Pixie server. And what you would do fundamentally from an Ansible perspective for the server you're waiting to come up is you would run the playbook, and the playbook itself would have a flag, and a flag is wait for this to come online. And so the first part is setting up the Pixie server, and that is very easy. So that is now serving your configuration and files for the new VM that's trying to get configured. Um, You just need a way to kick off that extra VM to come up. So inside VMware, you're going to use the API to stand up your resource with the template or with the ISO that you're using. And once that's up, it's going to check for a Pixie server on maybe it's on some VLAN. Hopefully, they're all on the same VLAN. And your second playbook, the one I mentioned, that's waiting for the connection. What it does is before it waits for the connection, it's going to check against the VMware infrastructure. So this is in the case of the VM. If it's not a VM and you're talking about bare metal, it's going to check against your router or your DHCP server to see what IP address it hands out. I'm going to get this IP address, and then the next task is I'm going to wait for this IP address to come up. And then this is the following step is how you would configure you would do whatever automation you need against that bare metal server once it's up. But for me, that's how I would go about it. I hope that gives you an idea of how to approach that. But that's only one of the ways to go about it.
Okay. Great.
Is
Yeah.
there another question?
Sure. Tim, I can reach back out with you, see if you have any more questions. Um, One of the questions was, how does testing work with Ansible automation? Not sure if you have any examples of using Ansible for testing purposes.
Testing in what context?
Yeah, that
Are we
there wasn't.
testing that?
Yeah, I think there wasn't too much. So I could reach out
Okay.
to this
Yeah,
individual and
so
try
my
to get more
question around
information.
that would be like, are we testing the playbook itself? Or are we checking to see if it works? Because there's the flag you can set to say, hey, I want to do like I want to run this playbook, but not actually do anything. right? So that would be a way of testing the actual playbook, and then there's testing the pieces of the playbook against your infrastructure to make sure everything is working. And that's actually not too hard either. But it delves down a few more routes. But that's why I was asking you what context of testing you were referring to.
Okay, good. Another one is, are there any plugins for formatting Ansible output, example, facts, into a more readable form, such as an HTML?
And HTML, um, not that I'm aware of. You can certainly filter it yourself. I mean, I know like you're asking because maybe there's a shortcut to doing that. Um, the I'm trying to think of you might want to be able to instead of using a plugin, my alternative, and hopefully this would be an easier alternative for you, is to create like an HTML template that has your variables in place. And the example that we're running through um, inside the demo later towards the end actually uses variables inside the HTML template, and that's how it's consuming from the Ansible playbook, and it's going to serve a website that has your custom variables. Um, I believe that would be the appropriate way to go about that. A plugin is used for data transformation, but I believe like the scope of like an HTML file is way too big for like that type of data transformation because an HTML file has a lot more content than your normal variable, right? Your normal variable is going to be providing like a set of data, whereas an HTML file is for like has a lot of different formats that has to address. But I digress. It's a lot of for me. I foresee issues with the plugin operating in that context. There certainly is a XML plugin if that fits more of your use case. XML is like in a way like the predecessor of HTML.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I know during one of my exams, I used that method. I just used the template method and inserted facts into that predefined template. That seemed to work best for me, what I was trying to accomplish.
Hmm.
But that's all the questions so far. We can keep going, Tony.
Yep. And to kind of touch on what you just mentioned, John, that would be, one of the easier ways of doing it from a developer standpoint. Like if you were trying to present Ansible facts inside a web page, in my opinion, the right way to do it is to take those Ansible facts, store it as a JSON inside a database, and then serve the information from the database into your web page, just like any regular website. And then you would use your web page to format that JSON in like a card, or in like a call, like in a table that fits your use case. Cool. All right, jumping back into the presentation. So a job template is what is comprising a playbook inside Ansible Tower. So what that means is in Ansible Tower, you specify a project, which is your GitHub, Bitbucket, or GitLab project, and then from that project you might have a playbook, right? Like you store your playbooks in your source control repository, and when you create a job template, you're going to specify the inventory, so the list of hosts that you're running against, categories, the credentials to access those devices. So remember, SSH requires a key or a password, and then your project, your GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket project will have the playbook. So you specify which playbook you want to run. In this little picture over here, you'll see that. So this is the YAML playbook that we're trying to run. This is the project, and this is the credential set we're going to be using, and this is the inventory prod. So this inventory will have all of our prod infrastructure, and we're going to be running this playbook. We're going to give it this name. Azure underscore spin up isn't really indicative of what it's going to be doing, but Here we can actually specify like the name and description to kind of give a better descriptor to run this job template. Whoops. Inventory. So this is what an inventory looks like inside Ansible Tower. It's pretty straightforward. Once you define whether it's from the YAML or you can type it in yourself. Whoops, let me go back to that. You can, that little flag here on is whenever you run it against this inventory set, if it's on, then it means this is one of the items you're going to be running it against. If it's off, then it means we're not going to be using this host. But here you can define like groups and flags as well. So it doesn't have to be on this specific inventory set as well. You can define a subset of the inventory and a subset of the subset. Long story short, you can very specifically define which host or hosts that you want to run against and refine that. Credentials are important. So you can consume credentials from Ansible Vault, HashiCorp Vault. There's your AWS keys you can create as well. This is a way of just defining how Ansible Tower authenticates against your infrastructure when you're running automation. A project. If you look here, you can see that this is the GitHub URL of this project, and this GitHub URL will have a set of playbooks. So pretty straightforward. This is how Ansible Tower will know where to get the Ansible playbooks from. So the RESTful API is how you can, if you decide to run a Python function or you have a web application that runs a specific Ansible piece of a website that runs, you click a button on the website and it runs some sort of automation component of Ansible Tower, like a playbook or maybe a workflow, or maybe it just gets info from the API, like what are the users inside Ansible Tower? I don't know why you do that, but that is an example. So role-based access control, so you can define individual users or you can put them in a team and you can put them in an organization. This is a way of just like separating users out and giving more refined, references to where the user is from a company standpoint. You can define rules against the team, rules against the organization itself. So everyone inside this specific team has view-only access. Everyone inside this other team has create and view access, so they can add Ansible playbooks in. And it gets very much more granular than that. Those are just simple use cases. Enterprise authentication, so you probably have your Active Directory you want to tie into, or maybe OAuth, so that you don't have to create the users individually. They can just, if they have credentials, they can just jump into Ansible Tower easily and have their roles defined based off of tagging. Centralized logging. You can export logs, audit information from Ansible Tower, so the results of a playbook into Splunk or other types of logging aggregators. Splunk is a example or a use case that always comes up. It's very popular. Remember when I said my favorite part of Ansible Tower is the workflow? This is what a workflow looks like. You're going to be able to tie together different job templates here. So each one of these job templates is the Ansible playbook, so they can run in parallel and they can wait until they all succeed to get into the next portion, or they can break off into different paths. The workflow is super powerful. So another popular topic in Ansible Tower is using it for GitOps, DevOps. So think building an application and then building the infrastructure and spinning up the VM for it to be tested on. that is your DevOps type of environment, right? So I'm building an application. I submit the code to GitHub or GitLab, and then part of my GitOps practices is, all right, once that code is there, it's going to trigger something like a webhook. So that webhook is going to trigger, maybe a component in Ansible Tower. Ansible Tower is going to spin up infrastructure that has Jenkins, some sort of uh, testing environment to run the application on, and then a deployment platform. So maybe I want to deploy it once it's tested inside a cloud provider and so on. This is, the whole idea of enabling GitOps. Scale, you can have more than one Ansible Tower environment and you can form a cluster. You can delegate different playbooks to run on different clusters for redundancy, how close the cluster or the Ansible Tower environment is to your actual server / data center, right? If you have like 3 data centers, you might have, one tower environment in each, and the playbooks you run might be local to the, specific environment. That's just, how you would scale out. We touched on cloud.redhat.com before. This is going to kind of go into those specific items in this category. So the automation analytics, it's a GUI. So you go to cloud.redhat.com and all of the Ansible Tower environments you stand up, it's going to aggregate metrics from that and give you very, very useful information. So think again, right? Like what's the most popular module that was used? What's the most popular template that was executed across the organization? What's not being used? So why is it still here? Maybe we need to update that. Are there any items that have come out of sync? Can we not access very specific nodes? Basically, you have all these Ansible Tower environments, and you just want a way to be able to see those environments in a single pane of glass. Because not all of the tower environments are going to be clustered together. That's another type of deployment too, right? Think, I'm a director for an organization that have these 5 teams: security, networking, development, etc. And they have their own Ansible Tower clusters. Me as a director, I don't want to jump into any one of those clusters. I want to see everything from a single pane of glass, and that's where this is very useful. I just touched on that, but to kind of go over that, it's the automation analytics is a way to just see health, utilization, and performance across the enterprise. This is how it looks. This is going to be more granular in the future. There's a lot of items on the roadmap in terms of analytics, and you don't have to use this. So it's not a requirement. Health notifications, I mentioned that before. I know licensing is big for people, so sometimes they want to be able to see if they're at the limit of their Ansible Tower nodes. Organizational statistics. So mentioned like jobs being ran. So like what's the most popular template, organization, you can filter, etc. So this is the comparison rate. So in your Ansible Tower environment, you're going to see like the most recent job template. And, it's going to be a cluster. So your cluster might be 3 Ansible Tower servers, whereas the automation analytics is all your Ansible Tower clusters. So it could be, 9, 9 environments, 12, 20. You're going to see data around like the templates that are being ran, modules. You can filter by the cluster. So it's a high level view. The collections. They are by partners, by your vendors. They're there so that you can jump right into the ones you're using. So if you're using VMware, you might want a VMware collection. If you're using if the partner is having you use VMware and Cisco, then they'll probably provide a collection of, or you might want to ask, hey, do you guys have a Ansible collection for these items? Um, this is where it's valuable. This is what it looks like. So your so I didn't mention roles before. Roles are custom ways of pinning together a set of playbooks. Now you might think, all right, well, what's the difference between a role, a module, and a collection? A role is for a very specific subset of tasks, right? So I have a role that spins up a web server, and it might just be comprised of a set of things for my web server to come up. Whereas my module is for VMware, or my modules for checking Cisco, or my modules for checking, Arista, and so on, right? A role is pretty generic, and it can comprise of a set of different modules, but you can think of them as like custom libraries that are made by the community. Whereas a collection is a combination of the two. A collection can be, all right, well, I'm going to be using VMware, and it might just have all VMware modules and all VMware roles because the VMware team treated it that way. Or if you're talking in the context of your partner, you're going to be using a collection that has a VMware role, a VMware module, and a Cisco module. So the VMware module might just be, I want to set up a VM. The Cisco module might be checking a VLAN. A role itself can be custom playbooks or a combination of playbooks and modules that check other items. Hey, is the IP address paintable? Is the has this item been configured on this device? Once you delve into the Ansible journey, you'll be able to distinguish. It's at a high level, they're very similar, but as you start using them, you can see how they're distinguished against each other. So the Automation Hub is where you consume different collections, whether it's from the partner or the vendor. So you can go to cloud.redhat.com, go to the Automation Hub, and just start searching to see what's available. This is just like an example, but if you look at the Ansible collections, there's a huge subset that we provide as well. This is in my opinion, this is a way to very easily get started to using Ansible. The collections come with the Ansible Tower and Ansible Engine ecosystem.
Hey, Tony, I just want to comment real quick on the Ansible Automation Hub. There was a question about firewalls and whether or not
Sure.
the cloud.redhat.com was available inside. And I explained that, but just to touch on Automation Hub, you can download collections outside of your firewall, put them on some sort of external media, and then transfer them into your tower instance behind your firewall, and then use them there. So you do have access to them. It's a little bit harder to use, but they are available to anybody air gapped.
Cool. Thanks, John. So, these are some ways for you to get started. There's workshops, there's training, the community, very important to be a part of because while there's so many people using Ansible, the community allows you to kind of help you not recreate the wheel because sometimes you have an idea of building something and it's already been done. So this will save you the headaches of just coming up with a way to do it yourself. And all of these slides are going to be in a PDF that John and the team will provide. So without further ado, we're going to jump into the demo real quick. It's not going to take more than a few minutes. And then we'll save the last couple minutes for questions. So this is my in-browser web GUI, or yeah, in-browser web GUI for my coding environment. So here I'm just going to show you a inventory file of the infrastructure that I'll be using. Mostly I'll be running playbooks against these three nodes. So they have this IP address, and this IP address, username and password right there. And this is my Ansible Tower environment. So I'm gonna, whoops, that is not the password. I'm gonna grab the password real quick. All right, so I'm gonna log into my Ansible Tower environment. It's pretty new. I actually didn't use this environment yet. Um, so now I'm here. I'm gonna jump into projects. And I can see that when this tower environment was provisioned, these two were already put in for me, so I don't have to do it myself. But if I click on this, I can see that it's referencing this GitHub. So I actually have this open here. So I'm just gonna double check, copy, I'm gonna paste this in, remind me later, same page. And when I get here, I'm gonna see that there's a README, there's images. So that's just the logo on the README, and where the playbooks are actually located are inside this. So you'll have roles, and you can delve into this to kind of see the differences. But here are some YAMLs that I can run. These are playbooks right here. So the playbook I'm going to be running is going to be the install playbook. So this one is actually the same as this one. So the difference between the two is a role is combining all of these things, albeit it's just inside a different folder for organizational purposes, but a role is very useful for just doing shortcuts, right? If you understand, Ansible well, then you'll probably be using roles a lot more than just writing out individual playbooks, or vice versa, because you find that writing out individual playbooks is easier for the team to kind of consume. But roles are a way to kind of allow other people to use tasks without them having to understand the task that you've written or set of tasks. So this playbook install is very similar to the one we saw in the slide deck. So we're going to check the Apache version. We're going to check the firewall version. We're going to enable it. And we're going to make sure it's running firewall permits HTTP and enable Apache. So to show you guys that none of that's running, we're just going to jump real quick into this host. And this is one of the three. It doesn't matter which one. Whoops. Let me zoom in so you can see. Is there a way to... All right. I hope this is big enough. All right. Student 2 at... Cool. The password is right here. I'll copy that, paste it. Awesome. And I'm going to check firewall. So let's do those. Cannot be found and cannot be found. I think I ran the right commands. We'll see. So we're going to run this playbook real quick. Inside Ansible Tower, of course. So because this is already a project in here, we're going to go to templates. We're going to create a job template. Check and run firewall D. And Apache. Inventory file, we're going to use the workshop inventory, which is exactly the same as this one right here. Run the project, workshop project, and this playbook. See how this shows up here now? So I know that this requires root to run, but I'm just going to show you guys what happens when I run it without root. And it's actually very easy to run it with root. So I'm going to launch this. It's going to bring me to this run window. I'm going to execute this, and it failed because it needs to run under root. So I'm going to go back into this job template and enable privilege escalation right here, save it, and I'm going to launch it. The silence is Apache doing its hard work. Great, it's working. And so quickly, I'm going to jump over here to see if, yep, now it's being loaded in. It's inactive, and it's going to do the firewall, and it's going to enable Apache. So let's check if Apache is running now. Great. So we see our Ansible playbook in action. So the next part of the demo is me actually using this role in this web content, and we'll see that it requires a couple variables. So jump into task, I'm going to check the main YAML. It's going to look for the stage. I believe it's stage. And it's going to look for the template variable. So I'm just going to use the dev stage, and I'm going to use this variable. So it's going to look a little confusing at first, but I'm going to show you how it looks inside Ansible Tower. So I'm going to create a new template. Top template. Add web content. Inventory file, same place. Run project. Playbook. Web content. And I'm going to make it a little bit more verbose, or very much so. Enable privilege. And what's great about Ansible is I can set launch variable. So I'm going to add a survey. So what that looks like is, what stage do you want to use? Obviously, I'm going to be using the stage variable, and I want it to be a text, and the answer would be dev. I can change that. When it launches, I can say like prod, whatever. This is basically a survey before you run the playbook. This is useful for different users to do custom variables. The other one is what content do you need in your HTML? Dev content was the variable inside our template because we're using a dev stage. So text, hello world, no need to FA. Add that, save it. I'm gonna save this, and I'm gonna launch it. So it's gonna ask me, I can change it to prod if I need to, but I'm gonna keep it as dev because those are the ones I'm gonna be running against. So it's just a lot of output. I don't really need to see all of this unless I'm troubleshooting, but this is important for you guys to see, like all of the things it's doing behind the scenes. It's a lot of stuff behind the scenes. Just waiting on the success, and it looks great. The only way if we really went through all of these logs, we would just rerun it with less verbosity and then just see if it ran successfully. But another way is just to curl it. Let's see, curl. Can I curl this address? Voila, and that is it. Running the playbook with the template and serving custom variables that we can set, or you can have it consumed from Ansible facts into the HTML. And this concludes the demo and the presentation. And I can stay on for a few more minutes to answer any questions if you guys would like that. Back to you, John.
Tony, that was great. Um, Currently, we have no more new questions. I think we answered them all that are in the question and answer list. As always, anybody on the call can email me. If I don't know the answer to the question, I'll definitely find it for you. Sorry about that, folks. Tony hit the wrong button. So if everybody's still here, um, I can see. Yeah, it looks like some of you are still here. Sorry about that. So again, reach out to me if you have any
All
questions.
right.
Thank you to everybody who attended today. I would like to thank a few people that made this happen. First, Tony, again, an awesome demo and presentation. Again, I learned some new things even today. Thank you, Jeff Thompson, our inside sales rep, for taking the lead and setting everything up. But also to like to thank our partners, CDW and DLT, for taking the time to set up the event today as well. They're doing a great job. Um, Again, everybody's doing great. I would like to plug a few things. Our next webinar in our series is more of a high-level overview of just RHEL, Red Hat Enterprise Linux. That'll be December 17th at 11 a.m. After that, and into the 2021, hopefully a better year for all of us, we're going to start with OpenShift, I believe, in mid-January, followed by a security-focused RHEL discussion. And then from there, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into some of our other products, like satellite specific use cases, as well as Ansible, like using Ansible for Windows automation or network automation. But again, thank you for everybody that joined today. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Jeff. And we'll talk again in December 17th. Thank you, everyone.